Hi friends, and welcome back to No Book Left Behind. I'm your host Mark, and today it's the final part of my May Reading Roundup. Hi, so it might be the middle towards the end of June, but this is the final part of my chaotic May Reading Roundup, which if you've been following the channel at all, you'll know was down to fairly extraordinary circumstances. But anyway, I've got 5 more books to talk to you about today, and the first of those was one I read digitally, and that's 2 O'Clock Courage by Gellett Burgess. A man comes to his senses on the street at night. He's sustained a significant head injury, and the result of which is he can't remember his own name or anything about his life. However, he does discover that he's in the area where a murder has been committed, that of a theatrical producer, and there's enough evidence to link him with the crime. So he travels back into the main city of Boston, where he occasionally runs across people that he knows, but he can't reveal the fact that he's lost his memory because he's frightened of being arrested for that murder. Now, this 1934 mystery thriller I found surprisingly absorbing. It is centred around that familiar noir trope of amnesia, but this is a very early example of it, and although Burgess certainly couldn't claim to be the first one to use it, it certainly wasn't the cliche it later became at this point. Now, this is quite a long novel considering the amount of plot that it has, and there is nothing very notable about the presentation, the execution or the resolution, but the more I read it, the more I found myself enjoying it and getting my teeth into it. Burgess is particularly good at writing female characters. Prissy Lassiter may be just the nominal love interest who's sidelined throughout most of the story, but she still manages to leave a mark thanks to her energy and vivacity, and that's a tribute to Burgess's skill as a writer. Better still is homeless ex-chorus girl Jo Rodney, who our hero treats to a meal after finding her sleeping rough in the park. Although she doesn't appear until probably about a third of the way through the book, she promptly steals the spotlight from all of the other characters. Her direct approach and street smarts finally resolving her into being a far better detective than anyone else in the story. And it's also pleasing that there's never any romantic interest between our nameless hero and Jo. She's just standing up for him because she thinks he's a right guy because he treated her to a meal when she was starving. It was filmed twice, first in 1936 as Two in the Dark with Walter Abel and Margot Graham, and then in a more superior version in 1945 under the title 2 O'Clock Courage with Tom Conway and Anne Rutherford. And that movie was co-written and directed by Anthony Mann, who, it was an early work of his, but he went on to become quite a notable director, both for dark thrillers, more famously for westerns such as The Naked Spur and Winchester 73. Certainly his movies are in general well worth tracking down. Now, this is the kind of book where it's hard to pin down exactly why you enjoyed it so much. There are no outstanding elements in any way, but I just found it a real pleasure to read, and I give it a quiet recommendation, especially if you're into mystery thrillers. And the second book I'm going to discuss today is Frantic by Noël Calef, or to give it its original French title, with apologies for pronunciation, A Censure pour l'Échafaud. Now, this is the story of businessman Julien Courtois, who is in deep with a loan shark who just happens to work in a tiny office a couple of floors above his own in a Paris skyscraper. Courtois can't repay the money that he owes, and the loan shark is going to call in the note on Monday, and Courtois' whole life will unravel. So he hatches what he thinks is a perfect murder. He will climb up the outside of the building. He will enter the loan shark's office, do the deed and climb back down again. This being done late on Friday, just as everyone is leaving work. And this way his secretary will carry on believing that all this time he's still in his own office. And it all works out fine. Courtois does the deed, climbs back down and leaves to go home for the weekend. Unfortunately, when he climbs into his car, he notices that he's forgotten to take the rope down from the outside of the building. It's still hanging there. So he rushes back inside, only to get trapped in an elevator when the janitor turns off the power for the weekend. Now, I found this one to be a slightly odd reading experience because I didn't really enjoy it all that much, but I couldn't help admiring the skill and cleverness of the resolution of the final act. That was very smart indeed. You see, the problem is that you can't really write an entire novel about a man being trapped in a lift. That would be just too difficult. So instead, Calef spent a lot of time with some other characters, specifically Courtois' wife and her brother, and a young couple who steal his car from outside the building. And the problem was that not only did I find these characters to be completely unsympathetic, I found them to be a real chore to spend any time with. They are actively annoying. His wife, Genevieve, is whiny and manipulative. And as for Frank, the male half of the young couple, well, he's just so cool and edgy. It's just very annoying. In fact, he's just a spoilt brat coming from a rich family. And he treats his girlfriend, Therese, like a doormat, which she goes along with, robbing me of any sympathy for her at all as well. But here's the thing. All these seemingly incidental events that go on and the actions that these characters take, which appear inconsequential at the time, eventually combine to ensnare our murderous hero in a complex way that he could never really have expected or fully understand. It's undeniably very clever and makes for a smart and satisfying climax to the story. Teresa even gets a very moving moment towards the end, which is a total surprise considering she's such an unsympathetic character throughout. Now, as I say, I read this digitally, so I did not appreciate that it's been republished recently in physical form by our old friends Starkhouse Press as part of their Black Gat series. Now, the book was adapted into a 1961 movie by French director Louis Malle under its original title, which translates in English into Elevator to the Gallows. I've not seen it yet, but the soundtrack is apparently supplied by a jazz combo which features the legendary Miles Davis on trumpet. In the end, I can't say I really enjoyed the experience of reading this one all that much. I did find it a bit boring, but I can't help but admire the cleverness and skill with which the author brings everything together at the end. Now, the first physical book of this video is this one, The Man Who Missed the War by Dennis Wheatley, which was originally published in 1945. Now, this is set at the eve of World War II and concerns an ambitious young engineer called Philip Vordell, who's come up with a unique plan to beat the blockade that he feels his country will face from Germany should war break out. His plan is to ferry goods across the Atlantic from America on a series of giant rafts, this being a considerably safer option than convoys of ships. Getting backing from a Norwegian businessman, Philip sets out from New York Harbour on a trial run, but unfortunately discovers only too soon that the businessman is actually a Nazi agent, as are the entire crew, and they are dead set on foiling his mission. He escapes on the rafts along with pretty stowaway Gloria, but they are swept ever further south by a succession of storms and end up eventually on the shores of Antarctica, where they discover the long-lost descendants of the continent of Atlantis. Now, this is quite an off-the-wall and outlandish Lost World novel from English author Wheatley, who mixes in some truly wild, disparate elements. After all, there aren't many novels that finish with Atlanteans trying to sabotage the D-Day landings using their infernal weather machine, while the ghosts of dead warriors of ages past fight the minions of Satan in the clouds above the English Channel. The Atlanteans gaining some of their power through sacrificing leprechauns to their ancient gods. So this obviously does all sound like a huge amount of fun. But is it? Well, in the end, I'd have to say, not really. The first problem is that it takes Gloria and Philip an age to reach Antarctica, pretty much half the book, and then there's a long section where they start living with leprechauns and have 2 children, and that's all before the Atlanteans turn up for pretty much the last 100 pages of the book. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if the Atlanteans didn't want to spend those 100 pages mostly going into a detailed explanation of what's happening in the war at the moment, which they are monitoring because they wish to influence it in favour of the Nazis. So this part of the novel is almost like reading a history textbook, and that's not really what I'd signed up for. And there's also the odd occasional intervention by the ghost of Philip's mentor, who drops by every now and then to give the couple some helpful advice, whilst mustering the hosts of heaven to fight the soldiers of Satan above the English Channel at the climax, I guess. Yeah, I've found this one a bit of a struggle, to be honest. It takes an awful long time to get going, and when it does, the events are strangely unengaging and static. The characters have little depth, and I wasn't particularly invested in their struggles. Also, the disparate story elements don't really come together in a convincing way, and in fact the whole thing came across to me as rather muddled, almost as if Wheatley was trying to, on the one hand, write a serious novel about World War II, on the other hand, write a Lost World novel, and on the third hand, if that's applicable, write some kind of book about esoteric spirits. It's just a very odd mix, and I don't think it really works. I mean, it's not unentertaining exactly, but it did try my patience quite a bit. And next up we have our latest entry in the Tales of the Weird series from the British Library, and this is A Phantom Lover and Other Dark Tales by Vernon Lee, and these are 6 rather lengthy short stories written between 1890s and the 1920s. Now, if I had to describe this volume in one word, that word would be frustrating, because Lee is clearly a very talented writer. Her prose is elegant, rich with background detail, and she creates a truly unsettling atmosphere at times in these stories. However, she is not very good at ideas or story development. I felt these to be lacking somewhat throughout. Of course, subtlety, understatement and implication can be highly effective in a ghost story, but in the end something tangible does have to happen, and considering these stories are very lengthy, there is not a great deal of development within them. I think she gets away with it in the title story and in Winthrop's Adventure, which I think are the 2 outstanding ones here. But even those would have benefited from a little more plot development. I think I would have enjoyed these more read in isolation rather than read one after the other, because that kind of less is more approach does tend to lose its luster over several hundred pages. So if you're someone who has little patience with a lot of background detail and needs something more substantial than just a lot of creepy atmosphere, then you're likely to be a little bored by these, I think. I certainly wasn't, because I was admiring her skill as a writer, but I was still waiting for something to happen most of the time. On a personal note, I enjoyed the book and salute the writing talent involved, but I don't think I'm going to be able to remember too much about any of these stories in a couple of weeks' time. And lastly, we'll move on to the final book of the 5, and the final one I'm covering in my May Reading Roundup videos. And this one's another one that I read digitally. It's The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Heinz Ewers, which was originally published in Germany in 1907 and translated into English in 1927. Now, this is the story of Frank Braun, a cynical world traveller who settles in a small Italian village in the mountains in order to write the great novel which will finally get the world to acknowledge his genius. He becomes fascinated by the American evangelical preacher from the village who has revived the inhabitants' religious devotions in a small church. Braun sees the opportunity to manipulate this into a full-blown cult and receive the rewards when it spreads beyond into the wider world. He even hypnotizes the village innkeeper's daughter to think that she is a vessel of God. But circumstances result in him spending some time away from the village, and by the time he returns, things have spiraled completely out of control. Now, I sought this one out because it's the first appearance of Frank Braun in a trilogy of loosely connected novels by Ewers, the second of which is called Al Ron, which was published in 1918. And I particularly want to read this one because it's the strange tale of a scientist who creates a woman by impregnating a prostitute with the semen of a hanged man. It's an ancient European folk myth, and kind of a Frankenstein story in a sense. It's been filmed several times over the years, mostly in Germany, notably in 1928 as a silent picture, and then again in 1930 as a talkie. Both versions starred Brigitte Helm of Metropolis fame, and certainly are worth a watch, particularly the silent version, which I really liked a great deal. However, after reading The Sorcerer's Apprentice, I'm not sure I'm going to be getting around to Al Ron in a hurry. I found the book to be pretty stodgy, to be fair. Okay, I'm not educated in some of the religious and philosophical teachings that might have lent some of the prose a little bit more meaning, but still, I felt that Ewers' determination to describe every single last detail of each scene pretty wearing, and it's a book of considerable length too. So despite some really powerful moments and some really good sections of writing here and there, I don't really feel this is something that I could recommend to anybody unless it really does sound like your sort of thing. It wasn't mine in the end. As I say, I probably will get round to Al Ron at some point, but I'm certainly in no hurry to do it now. So those were my last 5 books for May, making a total over the month of 15 books, which is a personal best, I think, at least since I've been keeping records. Okay, that's not very long, only about 6 months. But yeah, normally I kind of averaged 7 books before I started doing the Read What You Own challenge, and since then I've been trying to do 10 every month, and most of the time doing it, a couple of times failing. But yeah, because of circumstances that are revolving around the fact there was no power in this house for about a week, I have actually read 15 this month. So that's something I got out of this kind of domestic disaster that I've suffered. So anyway, the important thing is, of course, how does that stack up with the overall figures of the Read What You Own challenge? So now's the time to run the numbers. So I'm back on track for an October finish, and I certainly am glad about that. The book buying ban is quite painful, but it's something that needed to be done in order to sort my storage out, because I simply was having piles of books out of shot, but all around me on the floor here, and I was tripping over them a great deal, which I didn't mind too much, but the books kind of objected. Anyway, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for sticking with it all the way through to the end. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? Please share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you've enjoyed this video, why not pop me a quick like? Just a quick tap of the button, it only takes a split second. And why not considering subscribing to the video, even to the channel as well. That's the second time I've made that slip. Subscribe to the channel as well, and that way you'll get to see all my videos and not miss anything. So in the meantime, please do not forget to keep searching through those narrow side streets of your town to find those dusty, weird second-hand bookshops. Please don't stop going to those charity sales, those market stalls and those car boot sales, because there are treasures out there that only you can find. Be seeing you.